everybody. So we are so excited today. We are going back in time, back 20 years. We are talking about the year of 1998. This is kind of crazy for me because this was a very important year for me in my life in 1998. I started college in 1998. We're going to talk about the movies of that year, and I'm joined by my friend Conrado, who was a wee young one in
Yeah, that is
1998.
that is correct. I was a mere, I think, 4 years old back in 1998.
So now
No,
that I
that's
feel
that's a
so
lie. I was
old.
I was six. I was six, so a little older, but
It was
great age for movies.
yeah, it was an influential time.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah, no, I started college a year early because my family moved to California, and I didn't want to just go to high school for a whole new high school just for 1 year. That would seem dumb, so I just started college, and so yeah, I started uh, in 1998. We're talking about our top tens. I really tried to be honest with what really is my favorite and not necessarily what is the most critically lauded or what, things. And so there is, I admit, some nostalgia a little bit to some of them, but because that was such such a formative time. But I still I really love all of my picks, but I really just tried to go with what I thought was my favorite versus what is like the best. It's kind of like Citizen Kane is one of the best movies ever made. Is it one of my favorites? No, it's not.
Fair enough.
I don't know.
And yeah, and I think I also took a page from your book. We've been going back and forth sharing our lists in preparation for this episode, and I think there's going to be some surprises in mine because I've been tinkering with it until the last minute, and really at the end decided to go really with my heart for my picks. So I think it should be fun.
Well, I'm excited. Yeah, we don't know. You know my list basically. I made one change last minute, but I really have very little idea of what's on your list. A couple I know, but this is gonna be fun. It's gonna be more
All
of a
right.
surprise. But let's talk about 1998 as a whole, the year.
All right.
So the big Best Picture winner of the year was a shocker. Everybody was stunned that Shakespeare in Love beat Saving Private Ryan at the
Right.
Oscars. And this was, talk about a different time. This was Weinstein's greatest coup.
Yeah, correct.
He
That was
ever
the height
did.
of Weinstein. Oh, well, I think it was the first time he won Best Picture, right? Or he got all the way there. So that was a big deal. And I remember I got into the Oscars in the years after this. I was
Yeah.
6, 8, but when I was
Yeah.
about 10 or so. And that was really the height of when he used to get a movie in every year. And I remember in 2002, he had 3 movies in the Best Picture race back when it was just 5 nominees. So that he was really running the table.
Yeah. So do you think it's an outrage that Shakespeare in Love won? How do you feel?
Um, I don't think it's an outrage. I think it's a pretty good movie.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a good movie. I like both movies. I like Shakespeare in Love and I like Saving Private Ryan. So I would have been fine with either one of those winning.
Mm-hmm.
I think, the internet movie people just go back and forth with backlash and backlash to the backlash and backlash to the backlash to the backlash. That I feel like we've gone from saying Saving Private Ryan is a travesty that it won to saying actually Shakespeare in Love is better than Saving Private Ryan, and then going back to it and then
Yeah.
going back and forth. I
Right.
think they're both good movies.
I also think they're both good movies. We'll talk more about Saving Private Ryan later, but yeah, I think they're both good movies. It does seem like strange that it feels Shakespeare in Love feels smaller. I mean, I guess it's kind of like something like Moonlight winning. I mean, that's way more indie, but I don't know. Just when these sort of smaller movies beat these big epic movies, it's always kind of surprising. Or something like Hurt Locker, I think would be
Right.
another one beating Avatar. It's kind of
Yeah.
an interesting thing when that happens. And so I'm fine with it. I think they're both pretty good movies. But I don't know, it was a shocker at the time for sure. And you had Gwyneth Paltrow winning for Shakespeare in Love as well.
Deserved, Gwyneth Paltrow. I think she's really good in the movie. Um, I haven't seen all of those years' nominees, but I think
Yeah.
she's a pretty. I know she's like really not the most beloved person nowadays with her whole Goop thing and other stuff.
Yeah.
But I think regardless of her personal life, I think she's a really talented actress, and I wish she acted more. I feel like she's been taking a backseat lately, outside of popping into for 5 seconds of each Marvel movie.
Yeah, I agree. I think she is talented. She's talented, and I didn't realize that Life is Beautiful was 1998. Oops, missed that.
I think that, yeah, because I think that opened in Italy in 97, but it came to the US in the 98.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I think she is talented. She definitely can be irritating. Social
Right.
media and stuff like that, but that doesn't
Yeah.
really speak to her acting ability. It gets a little overshadowed. But you got I think that definitely Steven Spielberg was the right call for Saving Private Ryan.
For Best Director.
Best Director, yeah. I guess Roberto Benigni for Life is Beautiful, which I haven't seen that movie in a long time, so I don't know how
Same
it holds
here.
up. I didn't realize that it was 1998. So, and then I think probably, I don't know if I would have given Judi Dench the Oscar for Shakespeare in Love.
She's really funny in Shakespeare in Love, and it's a very Judi Dench performance. So,
Yeah,
uh,
I guess it's a true supporting role. I mean, she's
right. She's in very little of the movie,
very
but
little.
yeah, the way I see it is, I don't think it's the best Judi Dench performance, but I think if you look at that performance, you can kind of get what Judi Dench is as an actress.
Yeah,
I think that's, it's representative of her work.
I would have probably given it to Brenda Blethyn for Little Voice. I think she was really good in that movie. It's really a lead performance, just like the lead character. But that's just me. So yeah, and then you had Gods and Monsters getting Best Adapted Screenplay, Foreign Language Film Life is Beautiful, song When You Believe from Prince of Egypt. So an interesting year at the Oscars. As far as the box office, national box office, you had Lethal Weapon 4, Shakespeare in Love, Dr. Dolittle, Mulan, Deep Impact, A Bug's Life, There's Something About Mary, Godzilla, Saving Private Ryan, and Armageddon. But at the domestic, it was Patch Adams at number 10.
Wow.
Yeah, Godzilla at 9, Deep Impact at 8, Rush Hour 7, Dr. Dolittle 6, The Waterboy at 5, Bug's Life 4, There's Something About Mary 3, Armageddon at 2, and Saving Private Ryan at number 1. So it's pretty interesting. A movie like Saving Private Ryan getting number 1.
That is crazy to think about now. I guess the closest thing that's happened is American
Dunkirk.
Sniper a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and Dunkirk.
Right, but Dunkirk wasn't number 1. Just the number 1 movie of the year being a war movie like that, I think.
Oh, yeah. It wasn't number 1, but it was probably in the top 10, maybe.
Well, definitely top 10. But
interesting. Yeah, that's surprising to me as well. So it was the last 1998 was the last full year of the Siskel and Ebert program, which was very influential for me. I would watch it every week, even though most of the movies I couldn't see that they were talking about, but I was just so fascinated by the two of them and their conversations, and they made me want to analyze film, and I've always just loved film criticism.
Mhm.
And even if people completely disagree with me, as you and I often very much disagree, I just find it
Mhm.
really interesting to hear people's point of view. And I think it comes from that show, watching that show for years. And there's so many movies that they introduced me to, something like Hoop Dreams that I, wouldn't have saw without them.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. And anyway, they're the top 10 for Gene Siskel that year were he had Waking Ned Divine. There's something about Mary, Simon Birch, Ants, The Truman Show, Shakespeare in Love, Saving Private Ryan, Pleasantville, The Thin Red Line, and Babe, Pig in the City.
What a list.
So it's a
And
pretty, yeah, pretty good
yeah.
list, pretty eclectic list. And he was a big defender of Babe, Pig in the City.
Yeah.
Obviously, his favorite of the year. He loved it. And Roger, his top were Primary Colors, Life is Beautiful, Shakespeare in Love, Babe, Pig in the City, Elizabeth, Happiness, A Simple Plan, Saving Private Ryan, Pleasantville, and Dark City.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
it's
Pretty
interesting.
interesting list. I mean, pretty interesting favorites, number ones in those lists, right? Babe
Yeah.
and Dark City, very sort of visionary, kind of underrated movies
Yeah.
from '98.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, definitely. So it's interesting. The stinkers of 1998.
Mm.
You had a movie like The Avengers, not the Avengers that we know and love, but the
Mm-hmm.
Avengers from the UK. Oh man, I was surprised because I saw this movie in the theaters,
Wow.
and I remember just thinking it was so long and so boring. And I looked up; it's only 90 minutes, but I remember it was so long. Yeah, it was really bad. There's some really, as I recall, some really strange stuff. So maybe it might be more curious than I thought. But there's a whole scene where people are in bear costumes, and I don't know, it's very bizarre. But and then the Roland Emmerich Godzilla. I think this is
Mm-hmm.
the point where we all realized that Roland Emmerich was a hack and not a good director. Because they're great trailer for this
Yeah,
movie.
that's what I was gonna say. I remember the trailer for the movie. The first time I saw it, I was probably watching some kids movie, and it played
Yeah.
in front of it, and with the huge wave coming towards the fisherman, right? That's an amazing trailer, and the movie, of course, is not as good.
Oh, the movie's terrible. The problem with the movie is it's not scary at all, and it tries to be like this comedy, and it's just the only good thing about the movie is that it like has all of the Simpsons actors for some weird, strange reason. Just
Right.
like spot a Simpson character, like Yardley Smith is in it, and Hank Azaria is in it, and Harry
Right.
Shearer is in it. It's very weird.
And
Yeah,
speaking of Ebert and Siskel and Ebert, this is the movie in which there's the parody version of them, right?
yeah. Yeah, and I love their review of it. They were like, they didn't even do it right. They didn't even do a good job. Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, I don't even think that Independence Day, to be honest, holds up all that well.
Hmm.
I think that Will Smith kind of makes it fun because he was like a true movie star then.
Right.
But and I think the Bill Pullman speech is great. But as far as movies, I don't know. I just think Roland Emmerich is the worst. I hate his
Oh,
movies.
okay.
You're a fan?
I've barely seen any of his movies now that I'm thinking about it.
Oh,
I
okay.
haven't seen Godzilla or Independence Day since I was a kid, and I don't think I've seen anything else.
Oh, okay. Yeah, he's the worst. In my opinion, I'm sure he's a super nice guy, but as far as his movies, I
Wait,
don't
did
care
he do
for
the
him.
Caveman movie? There's a
10,000
cave.
BC.
Uh-huh. Is that
Yeah,
him?
he did that.
Okay, yeah, I saw that, and that was rough.
It was
That
rough, and
was
there
that was my how long is this movie experience? Like it's just so boring and keeps going.
because they're not even like B movie kind of schlock fun on that level. To me, at least, they're just tedious and terrible humor and just the worst.
Right.
Um, for me. Yeah, and then another notorious entry from 1998 is Gus Van Sant's shot-for-shot remake of Psycho. I've actually
Yeah,
never seen it, but yeah.
me either. And I wanted to watch it for this, from preparation for this, just because I wanted to be the one person that thought it was brilliant and put it on my list and
Yeah.
be like the contrarian, but I just couldn't get a hold of it
Mm,
in
yeah.
time.
Yeah. Then we had Jack Frost, which is bizarre. It's totally one of those. I joked that every Hallmark movie could be, if you change the score, could be a horror movie, and that is true about a lot of family films also, and
Right.
definitely true with Jack Frost. Like this creature that they created is so terrifying looking, and the idea that this is supposed to be like a heartwarming thing that his father returns in the form of a snowman is just so bizarre. I don't know what they were thinking. It's
Well, yeah, to your credit, when I was a kid, 6 years old, and I first encountered the idea of this movie, I thought it was like some sort of bizarre horror film, and I did not
yeah,
want to watch
yeah,
it.
yeah. And we also got, I think, the beginning of the downfall of Adam Sandler with The Water Boy. Even though it was a big hit, I think it was the first one that, I mean, I've never been that big a fan of his,
Hmm.
but I think that at least like Billy Madison and the Wedding Singers have some jokes that land.
Hmm.
I think The Water Boy was the beginning of the end for me. That was terrible. And then I personally hated Armageddon. I remember watching it with my friends, and they were all having a great time. And I was just sitting there like, what are you guys doing? Like this, to me, it was just so stupid. And so I've never been a big person with disaster movies. They're just not my
Hmm.
genre. So that's
Hmm.
part of it. But it was just one of the first times that I had like a distinctly different response than everybody else that I was with. I was watching a movie.
Right.
I did not care for it. And yeah, I don't like it. So I don't know. How do you feel about Armageddon or Michael Bay?
Um, Armageddon. I saw it a long time ago, and I rewatched it for this, and I didn't like it.
No.
No. But it feels very much like his sort of movie, which I guess is just, Michael Bay's style is like all over it. It's a bizarre movie though. It has like these weird jokes that like have not aged well at all, and it's really very sexist in many ways, and it's also very like has a very weird attitude that sort of macho sort of thing.
Yeah, that's Michael Bay for you, the machismo thing, and the whole like love scene with animal crackers. I'm just like, I didn't need that
Yeah,
in real
right.
life. I did not need that. So I really just like that one too. And so yeah, that's some of the bad movies. It's not as bad as our 2008 bad movies like Hottie and the Naughty or something like that. Most of these are, but yeah, and Patch Adams is pretty
Right.
terrible. It's
Which
pretty,
was a huge hit. I didn't know it made that much money.
yeah.
Um,
And I feel bad for the real guy because
sure.
evidently he's actually a really cool guy, and like what he does is but
Right.
Ron Williams, man, when he had a bad script, he struggled.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
All right. Well, there you go. So that's sort of our breakdown. The worst, Gene Siskel had Godzilla as his worst of the year, and Roger Ebert had Patch Adams as his worst
There you go.
for the year. So, all right, there we go. So let's dive into our list. Did you have any honorable mentions you wanted to talk about real quick?
Um, I don't know. There's one honorable mention that I'm pretty sure is going to be on your list, so I'll save
Okay.
that for later. A couple movies that I liked that didn't quite make the list. I had a little trouble coming up with 10. There's like six or so movies that I really love, and then I was trying to get other movies that I really loved into the bottom spots. And I was rewatching a lot and seeing a lot of movies that I really admired or that I liked things about them, but that didn't really, you know,
Yeah.
go the whole way for me. And some of them include Primary Colors, which is this Mike Nichols movie written by Elaine May about the sort of like version of the Clinton campaign from '92, which I thought was really interesting. Especially watching it many years later,
Uh-huh.
I was expecting it to be dated, but it actually, you know, feels relevant in a lot of ways, and I think
Yeah.
it's worth a watch.
Yeah,
Also,
it's a
yeah.
pretty good movie, good acting. And I actually read the book at the time.
Oh
So
wow.
yeah, so it was a pretty good movie. So yeah.
Yeah. And also Beloved, which is also based on a very obviously acclaimed book by Toni Morrison, and the movie version starring Oprah and directed by Jonathan Demme, which I think is a very out there sort of take. You
Movie.
know, I didn't expect like such a bizarre sort of ghost story type of movie that goes all the way there from, you know, I expected like a
Mhm.
prestige period movie, and it's something different, quite different. I don't
Yeah.
think, you know, there's things about it that I'm a little unsure of, but I think it's really uh, bold filmmaking. So I really like that too.
Cool. Yeah, some of my honorable mentions, I have Babe Pig in the City. I think it is really, really out there and cool and different and kind of I like the fact that George Miller just did his own crazy thing, and I don't know.
Hmm.
I enjoy it. It's definitely divisive, but I like it. And then Shakespeare in Love, I have at 14. Summer of the Monkeys is definitely an underrated live action Disney film.
Oh,
Very sweet.
I haven't
Based
even
on a
heard
book.
about that one.
Yeah. Depression era story of a boy who finds these circus um, monkeys. Anyway,
Right.
it's good. And then I actually really love the live action Madeline with
Oh,
Frances
yeah.
McDermott. It's
Mm-hmm.
funny, it's sweet. It's kind of a precursor to something like Paddington.
Nice.
I really like it, and I almost had this in my top 10 and last minute changed it out, but I really do love Hope Floats. It was a big step for Sandra Bullock, who I've always been a big fan of, especially back then. This was a tearjerker as opposed to her typical. At that time, she had just been basically doing romantic comedies, except for maybe like Speed.
Mm-hmm.
Or Demolition Man. And so for her to come out with this really emotional movie where about, I like the fact that it's very untidy. She spends a lot of the movie in like her pajamas, and I mean she was basically dumped on national television, and how that would feel. I think Mae Whitman is really good as her daughter, who like kind of hates her mom, and as opposed to like a lot of movies where she'd be sort of precocious and cute and everything. And I think that Harry Connick Jr. is actually really swoon worthy, and I really like it. But anyway, I ended up having it at 11. So
Right.
some of my honorable mentions. So, all right, let's talk about our list. So, I'll share my number 10, and you share yours. So,
Perfect.
after much weighing back and forth, I decided number 10. I went with A Bug's Life from
Uh-huh.
Pixar. Yeah, I think this movie is kind of underrated. I still think it actually looks really cool. I think they were very inventive in creating the uh the whole colony and the whole ants. And I love like sequences like when he goes to the city. That
Mm-hmm.
was
Mm-hmm.
really creative. And a lot of we were talking about A Star Is Born and how it was like for me it follows a certain formula, but it was executed really well. And I think that's the same here for this. I don't have a problem with a formula or something being somewhat predictable if it's executed well. And I think this is. We've seen Flick's kind of character many times, but I think it's executed well. I'm definitely rooting for him, and Princess Ada, and I love like little scenes like I love when he's like, it's a rock. I know it's a rock. Don't you think I spent a lot of time around rocks? Stuff like that I think is really fun. And I love this whole circus troupe. when they're and I love the someday I'll be a beautiful butterfly and then everything will be better. And that's really funny. And I think that Hopper is a pretty good villain and the pretty menacing and scary. I think the scene with the bird is pretty well done.
Very, very, it goes there. It's like pretty
Yeah.
dark, the scene with the bird. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. So I think it has a great voice cast. Everybody, now we're kind of down on Kevin Spacey, but he does a good job as Hopper. Julie Louis-Dreyfus, Dave Foley, Hayden Panettiere, Richard Kind, the whole cast, David Hyde Pierce, great cast. So I'm going to go with Bug's Life at number 10.
Well, good. I actually agree with you. I think A Bug's Life is actually a really good movie, and I think it's very underrated in the Pixar sort of canon. When people talk about Pixar movies, they tend to forget it or rank it really low, and I think it's really solid. I mean,
Yeah.
It's a really good movie.
Yeah. Do you like it better than Ants in the Ants to
Oh, I don't think I've ever seen Ants all the way through, and I've tried a couple times.
Yeah, I agree. Ants was a weird movie, but I don't think it works. It makes some interesting choices, but I don't know.
The animation in Ants, the faces are really freaky. I think they were a step behind Pixar on that, and I think Pixar did the right call in making the ants look so different from what actual ants look like. They're blue and they have these big eyes and whatever. They made them very cartoony and endearing.
I do like the whole kind of war aspect of Ants, which it's really strange, but it's kind of interesting. But like the whole Woody, and like it's mixing this like war subplot with like Woody Allen thing. It doesn't quite work for me, and it is very brown. Ants, the whole movie is just like brown. So anyway, what do you have at number 10?
So my number 10, same as you, after much deliberation, I ended up with a movie that really meant a lot to me as a teenager, especially, and that I recently rewatched, and I think is still pretty cool and exciting, and that is the movie Run Lola Run, which is a German movie directed by Tom Tykwer, in which it's a very 90s movie with like a techno soundtrack and a lot of like crazy editing and cinematography, and it's basically the story of this girl Lola whose boyfriend has gotten into trouble with some mobsters, and he has to come up with like 100,000 I think it was German marks back then, right? So she only has 20 minutes to find the money and meet him and whatever. And you see her try to do this and fail a couple of times, and then like the whole movie like resets, and then she tries again. So it's kind of like a video game inspired sort of movie, has that sort of structure. And it's really cool. It uses animation at some of it. The music is great, and I think the movie tries to be about some like philosophical ideas about life and reincarnation or whatever. I'm not sure that I'm all the way there with it about that. I'm not sure what it's want to say, but as a like exciting, fun experience that is like very energetic filmmaking, that it's about movement and action, I think it's really, really exciting and really fun to watch still to this day.
That's cool. I need to watch that. I haven't seen that. That sounds good. I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it. That sounds good.
It's really fun.
Yeah, cool. So my number 9 is Mighty Joe Young. This is the remake. I haven't seen the original, and so maybe if I saw the original, I wouldn't like it as much. But I do think it's an underrated Disney film. And when I think about movies that are similar that are made today with something like Kong Skull Island, this is just so much better than something like that. This has like real heart. And the VFX looks so much better in this, in my opinion, than in something like Kong Skull Island. And I just think if you want like a blockbuster that's like that has heart, that looks great, that's an old fashioned family blockbuster, then this is it. You've got Charlize Theron, you have Bill Paxton, Regina King, pretty great cast. Like some people would say, oh, the villains are stock villain characters. There's just these poacher guys, but I don't really care. Like that's fine for me if it's like if it's done well and they're fun stock villains. I'm fine with that. So I mean, I don't know. In this kind of a blockbuster, I don't need every character to be like deep and fleshed out, I guess. But I just feel like this is really satisfying family blockbuster. It was cool. I reviewed it on my channel, and it was neat to see a lot of people like, oh yeah, I love that movie. That movie is so underrated. And so I don't know. It's the relationship between Charlize Theron and Joe is well done, and you feel invested. And so I like it. And James Horner score, which always is a plus in my opinion.
Cool.
So,
I have actually never seen it, but formative time for a 6-year-old. I remember the trailer very vividly when I watched it in front of probably some other Disney movie, and I remember back then being very impressed by the visual effects.
yeah.
Like that gorilla really looked like something of this world when I saw it as a 6-year-old.
Yeah, you're number 9.
All right, so my number 9 is another European art movie. This time is one called The Celebration, and that was directed by Danish director Thomas Vinterberg. In 1995, this group of European filmmakers mostly, including Lars von Trier and also the director of this movie, got together and created this Dogma 95 movement, which were these sets of rules which determined what kind of movie you had to make in order to be part of this movement. And they wanted to be very realistic and have this very specific aesthetic. And they had a bunch of rules. For example, you could only use natural lighting, and it could only be in a real location. You couldn't bring any props or things that you couldn't find in that location. Had to be handheld camera, video, all these sort of things. And The Celebration is the first movie that tried to honor these rules. And it's basically the story of this wealthy family that comes together to celebrate the birthday of basically the patriarch, I guess, of the family. And then they go to dinner, and one of the children makes a toast in which he accuses the dad of having abused him as a child sexually. And there's this whole thing of like, what is going on? The whole family is trying to first is saying, well, he's just joking or whatever, he's saying this, and there's this whole sort of crisis management of what is going on. Is it true? Is it not? What's going on between the dad and the kid? And it's sort of like a very European sort of controversial family drama sort of thing. And it's very interesting precisely because of, I think, the filmmaking, because all of these limitations that the movement had put on the filmmakers, this movie really goes around them in a really interesting way. And the editing is very bizarre. Actually, I might not recommend you seeing this movie because of your motion sickness, because there's a lot of handheld camera. There's a lot of it really wants to put you in a very uncomfortable situation through very uncomfortable filmmaking. And it's not a pretty looking movie. There's a lot of weird cuts and camera moving all the way around. So it really puts you in a very stressed out sort of mood, as if you were experiencing this very uncomfortable moment in these people's lives.
Right. So my number 8 is a film that a lot of people would probably dismiss because it's a remake of a classic. And it's a rom-com, so people dismiss those a lot of times too. But for me, I actually think The Parent Trap is a great movie. It's number 8 for me. I really love both versions of Parent Trap. Even though it probably made life terrible for all people that were divorced with kids. But I love the original with Haley Mills. Maureen O'Hara is amazing in it. And I think this is one of the best remakes ever made. Like, as far as it's just really, it's sweet, great chemistry between Dennis Quaid and Natasha Richardson. I love the little side romance with the butler and the housekeeper,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. I love
Yeah.
that. That's so cute. I think that Lindsay Lohan does a good job of portraying the two different girls and having individual personalities, and it pulls it off, I think, pretty well. And I totally could be submarined like these girls do to Meredith here.
Oh.
Like, I am not an outdoors camping person at all, and like, you could easily. I love when she's like, "Get me out of this stinking fresh air." I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's me. That's me." Yeah, so I think that's really funny, and I don't know. I think a lot of people say that Nancy Myers is the new Nora Ephron. I highly disagree. I don't think that she's near as good, or certainly not even close to as good a writer as Nora Ephron. But I think this is probably her best movie.
Yeah. I would agree with that. I would agree so much with that, in fact, that Parent Trap is also my number 8 in
Oh, look
a
at
very
that.
shocking turn of events.
Yeah. So what
But
do you
yeah,
like about it?
I think, well, first of all, this is a foundational movie for me. And my sister
Oh,
used to love this movie, so we watched it all the time in my house. So it's like one of those movies that is, you know, stuck in my brain
yeah.
from an early age. And I think it's just a very, very elemental movie about like very sort of, strong emotions that you have as a kid, right? Like I think it plays into this very sort of elemental fantasy of like thinking maybe I do have like a twin, lost twin
Yeah.
person that is just like me, but just the different, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And also, of course, there's a whole thing of like trying to get the parents back together when they have been divorced. It's also probably a really strong childhood feeling as well. So I think it plays into that really well for children. And for adults, rewatching it a couple of days ago, the thing that really struck me was how many times I teared up whenever one of the adults recognized the child that they hadn't seen in a long time, right? When they realized that Annie was actually Hallie or the other way around, and the way they reacted to it, it was like, it was this very overwhelming feeling of like you're seeing a person that you thought you knew with completely different eyes because it's a
Yeah.
different person than what you were thinking. And it was really moving in that
Yeah.
way to me.
Well, and just when they're talking about like their love and their lives, and I think it is heartfelt. It is, and they just have such good chemistry, the two of them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Really, really,
Yeah,
really
Dennis
good.
Quaid and Natasha Richardson, they're really
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Um,
So
yeah.
yeah, it's great. Well, that's fun that we both have it at number 8. I mean, the whole idea of just like splitting up like we're each
It's
gonna take one is kind of bizarre, but
completely ridiculous. I don't think you could ever do that. That's like
no.
cruelty, but it works for this sort of thing.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, so my number 7 is The Mask of Zorro. And this movie is such a fun movie. It's a fun blockbuster with, I think, perfect casting of Antonio Banderas as Zorro.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. You have Anthony Hopkins as the original Zorro, which probably should be somebody that's Latino, but whatever.
Right.
It
Yeah.
works. And and then Catherine Zeta-Jones, perfect casting. She's so like sexy and great, and they have really good chemistry between the two of them. There's some really fun like old school kind of action sword fighting on horses, stuff like that. Martin Campbell, he knows how to make, well, when he wants to, he knows how to make a really entertaining blockbuster.
Mm-hmm.
And he's phoning it in on Green Lantern, but when he wants to, he can make it really fun, whether it's James Bond or
Zorro.
this. And I don't know, I just really like it. I think it's funny and it's exciting, and it has some good action set pieces, and so yeah, I have it at number 7.
Yeah, it's a really fun movie. I agree with that. And I agree Antonio Banderas is really good in it. Very
Yeah,
charismatic, very
yeah,
charming.
yeah.
Yeah, I endorse this pick.
Okay, good. So what do you have at number 7?
My number 7 is a movie that we mentioned before, and that is the very infamous Shakespeare in Love,
Ah, yes.
winner of the Best Picture Oscar for 1998, which, and has been very maligned throughout the years. But I think it's a very charming, very enjoyable, very successful movie. I think it's funny. I think it's romantic. I think most of the performances are great. Also, you have to understand, I went to school for theater. I'm a theater person. I
Oh, yeah.
write plays, so I do enjoy all of the like sort of backstage things that are going on in the movie and all the inside jokes about Shakespeare and theater and things like that. Um, on that front, I think the movie is very clever and very witty about the sort of inside jokes that it makes about that, and I
Hmm.
enjoy it immensely. And it's my number 7.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really good movie. I think that Gwyneth and Joseph Fiennes have pretty good chemistry, and I mean that's like honestly like 90% of a romance. If the leads have chemistry, then I'm probably gonna like it. And it's so frustrating too. I mean, it must be so frustrating for the makers of the film because that's like kind of an intangible that they have no control over. You can have all of the pieces in a row, and it just doesn't have the chemistry. And then
Hmm.
you can have, and then it just works. Like it's a weird thing, but I think they do, and I think that there's definitely a lot of sexy scenes for sure in
Yeah.
here. um, but yeah, the whole idea of like playing a part, and I think it's a very like fun idea of
Hmm.
of sort of the idea that Shakespeare, was inspired, and you get to see little peeks into Romeo and Juliet and some of
Hmm.
his other plays, and it's fun, and you get to see a young Ben Affleck in here.
Yeah, and who is very funny and
Yeah,
I think very good in this movie. I
yeah,
think it's one of his best performances,
yeah.
actually.
It's a great cast. Rupert Everett, Colin
Hmm.
Firth is the villain.
Colin Firth. You have Tom Wilkinson is also really funny.
Huh?
Jeffrey Rush, Judi Dench, with who we talked about earlier.
Yeah, yeah. My number 6 is I. If you follow my channel, you know I love Cinderella, and I have reviewed tons of different versions of Cinderella on my channel. And so it's probably no surprise then that I have Ever After as number 6 on my list. It's one of my favorite versions of Cinderella. This is definitely like the feminist version of Cinderella. Like she's like a scholar and reads. And they like have this romantic date in this library that's like surrounded by ivy, and it's very like romantic, and they debate utopia and philosophy, and it's great and so romantic. I think Doug Scott is so great as the prince of this, and I think that they do have chemistry, Drew Barrymore and Doug Scott. I love when she frees herself from this guy that has her. I actually think that Angelica Houston is as the evil she's Baroness Rodmiga de Ghent or something like that is her name in this. I think she's actually a pretty well written character. She's a pretty good version of the evil stepmother. She talks about how she had basically had to get married because she had to survive, and she didn't know her Danielle's father at all. I really like that they this is the only one that I know of that has a male fairy godmother, and the fact that they
Hmm.
didn't have any magic was kind of fun and creative, and
Yeah. I
like
think
they're
you're burying the lead a little bit, not saying that the fairy godmother is Leonardo da Vinci.
yeah, Leonardo da Vinci is the fairy godmother, and so like science and like inventiveness is their version of magic, which is fun, and I just really love it. I think that Melanie Linsky is really good as one of the evil stepsisters,
Hmm.
uh, and so I love it. I think it is so romantic.
Cool. I saw it as a kid. I remember thinking it was weird because of the whole Leonardo da Vinci thing. But it's probably a pretty good movie.
Yeah, it is.
Six is a movie that I'm pretty sure we're gonna be talking about later again, and that is Afterlife, the
Ah,
Japanese movie directed by
yes,
Hirokazu Koreeda, which I think is on your list as well.
it is. Yeah. So
Yeah. So should we save it for
yeah,
later?
we can save
Okay,
it.
great.
So okay. So my number five is Mulan. I love Mulan. I think that it does a lot of things that the Pocahontas did wrong for me
Mm,
in telling this kind of story. I think I liked Mulan so much as a character. She's strong, but she's like willing to play ball with people, which Pocahontas really wasn't. Like she does the matchmaking, ceremony, whatever. She tries. She's really trying, but it's just not who she is, and it's not working. And then she only joins the army to save her father. She doesn't do
mhm,
it out of rebellion or out of uh some kind of free spirit thing, which makes her a really easy character to root for and a really likable character. And I love the scene when she makes her decision and she puts on the armor. You see her cutting her hair, and that whole sequence with the music I think is really strong. I
mhm.
actually really like the music in this. I feel like it's a little underrated as far as music. And I think that it's really fun to see the I don't know, Disney's view on like gender dynamics is really kind of fun. Like is it's kind of fascinating of like, oh well, boys smell, and how they
Uh,
like the other soldiers, and kind of the affectations that she has to take on in order to fit in
mhm,
is really cool. And I the and the big knock against this movie that people usually say is that the villain is one note and not very good. But
mhm.
I heard an interesting debate about that, where someone said that really he's not the actual villain. Like the army is the villain, the whole, that are taking over, trying to take over. And that's kind of an interesting take on it. But yeah, it's fine with me. I don't care about that. I think Eddie Murphy's actually better in this than he is in Shrek, personally.
Sure.
And I think it's actually quite devastating when it gets uncovered that she's a woman. And I think that Chang, the guy, is super hot. I love
Right.
him. And so all those reasons, I mean, some people like the scenes with the ancestors are cringy and not great, but overall, I just really I love the animation, and I love Leah Salong as a
Mhm.
voice. She's great. So yeah,
Um, yeah, I like Mulan as well. I think it's a very solid movie. I think it works really well. I would say that it is I just think it doesn't really hit the peaks of some of the other movies from this period in Disney, but
uh-huh.
it's like one of the better ones, I think, for sure. Um, the music, I think there's some standouts in the music. Uh, the one you alluded to, the training montage
Yeah,
song. What's that one called?
make a
It's
man out of you.
Mega Man Out of You. That I think is an amazing piece of like, musical number. I think that
Yeah,
is so great. And then the other songs, some of them are better than others. But overall, I think it's a very successful movie. Obviously, like you say, the gender dynamics are very 1998, and I think it works for the
yeah,
most part.
yeah. And it does go to some dark places for a Disney film. There's the whole scene where Chang returns to his village and they've all been slaughtered. That's
Hmm.
pretty
Yeah, yeah,
intense.
yeah, yeah, for
So
sure.
so what do you have at number five?
At number five, I have The Big Lebowski.
Oh, all
Very
right.
famous movie uh, that was a bit of a failure at the time, at least at the box office, but became sort of a cult classic. Directed
Yeah.
by the Coen brothers, who are some of my favorite filmmakers of working today. Jeff Bridges as the lead role. I think he's amazing as the dude who is this guy who's sort of like a slacker who gets thrown in the middle of this sort of like noir type conspiracy. Um, I think the thing about the Big Lebowski is that either you vibe with it or you don't, right? It's either your thing and you're okay with it being this weird movie which the plot doesn't really make that much sense and it's just not really about what happens but just like experiencing the whole thing and enjoying it, or you don't. And if you don't, then you're not gonna like it.
Yeah.
I think it's just, yeah, I think it's just it's like a hangout movie in which you want to hang out in this world. And the thing that I admire the most about it is, I think, precisely the fact that I think that the movie is just, it is what it is. It doesn't really want to do anything other than just do the things that it wants to, do things that I guess the Coen brothers thought were funny. Or
number 4, I have The Truman Show, and I love The Truman Show on so many levels. I really think Jim Carrey works in this role as Truman, and I have I guess a special place in my heart for it because when I was working as a teaching assistant, my emphasis in college was on political theory, and I was trying to explain to this woman about the Plato's theory analogy of the cave.
Right.
Trying to explain to her what is it, and I was like, and then it just hit me. I'm like, it's the Truman Show, and I'm like, have you seen the Truman Show?
Right.
And I talked to her about how the director is like the philosopher King's, who's projecting the life that's the right life for Truman, just like in the analogy. And she was like, oh, okay, yes. I felt so proud of myself that I just explained that to her, and so anyway, but I think it's actually really funny and it's really thought-provoking and sweet. And I think that Laura Linney is so good as this woman who's pretending to be, but actually is his wife. Like, that's such a weird thing. I like Ed Harris a lot as the director, and it's such an interesting movie to watch now after we've had 20 years of reality television and voyeurism and stuff like that, and that, so it almost has this sort of dark edge to it that I don't think it necessarily even had back then, that it has now. And but there's still a hopeful feeling about it. And to sort of ask that sort of basic question: is it better to live a life of choices where you can screw up your life, or is it better to have limited choices and make the right, and be content? Like, is it better to have the good and the bad? And so the good is really, really good and the bad can be really, really bad? Or is it better to just live life, And so it's an interesting question. And, a lot of books have been written about that same question, something like The Giver. So
I like The Truman Show a lot. I think it's a really good movie. I think Jim Carrey is excellent in the movie. Yeah. I think he does an amazing job, and I think he is perfect casting. And in 1998, I can't really think of any other actor that it would have done a better job of being this sort of lovable person that the whole world is obsessed with, because the whole world was obsessed with Jim Carrey back in the 90s, He was like this charismatic figure, and I think he really shows a very sweet side to himself that I think up to that point he hadn't really explored as much. So I think he's excellent. My only issue with the movie, and it's not really a huge issue, I think the movie works really well on its own. I just feel like I am more interested in what happens after the movie ends, if that makes sense. I feel like I for some reason I feel very much like, I just want this movie to keep going. I want to know what happens when this guy leaves the bubble, That's the only thing. I just think like things were getting really interesting, and then the movie ends, and I'm like, okay, yeah, it's a big triumph, but I also, I feel like we were getting to what I really wanted.
Yeah. I'd like to see him finally go to Fiji. That would be
great.
Yeah, I can see that. Maybe we should have gotten a sequel. Peter Weir let us down. That would have been fun. So what's your number 4?
My number 4 is another movie by another of my very favorite directors, and that is Rushmore, directed by
Uh-huh.
Wes Anderson. And it's his second movie about a Max Fisher, played by Jason Schwartzman, who is this high school student who is a bad student, but is really great at extracurricular activities and is the president of every single club in the school. And um, he sort of gets into this fascination with one of his teachers, and there's a sort of rivalry between him and one of the fathers at the school who is also sort of courting the teacher. Um, I think this is, well, Anderson is one of my favorite directors. I think this is the movie in which he really comes into his own. His first movie before this, Bottle Rocket, I think is really interesting, but there's some things that don't really quite work about it, especially towards the end for me. And this
Uh-huh.
one, I feel like it's really really gets to the sort of characters that he's interested in. And, Max Fisher is, I it's an annoying character. He's a frustrating boy. He's very aggrandizing, and he is very self-centered in many ways. But I really identify with him because I was kind of that way when I was in high school. And I was also very interested in theater, like he is putting on this crazy elaborate shows, even though it's just a high school production. And yeah, I think that's how I connect with the movie. It's
Yeah.
really about this kid sort of learning about life.
Yeah, I think I personally like Wes Anderson more when he's like a little bit gentler in
Mm-hmm.
something like Moonrise Kingdom. I think I like better than this. It had been a little bit oversold to me. I think when people were saying it's the greatest thing ever and it's the greatest comedy and whatever. And so I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if I hadn't had that kind of build up, then maybe I might have thought differently. But to me, I felt kind of bad for this teacher. Like I felt like I don't
Oh,
know.
definitely.
I felt like it was a little mean spirited for me, the way they treated her and the
Hmm.
way I don't know. I just felt like I didn't love it, but
Right.
I get it and I get why you would like it. But yeah, I think I like the more gentle version of Wes
Mm-hmm.
Anderson personally
Yeah, I
better.
could see that. I definitely think it's on purpose that both Max and the Bill Murray character uh, are really sort of focused on each other, and they're fighting each other over this woman who they don't really, you know, take that much take her into account as a real person. I think that's part of the story, but also I can see how that can be frustrating on its own. So I totally understand.
Yeah. Cool. Well, good. All right. So my number 3 is the aforementioned Afterlife by Corrida, and we talked about Corrida in our 2008 ranking,
Mm-hmm.
and I even though his movies all have really high scores, I still think he's underappreciated, and I wish that more people. I wish that he had kind of the following that's I mean, he's not going to have the following of like Kurosawa or whatever, but I kind of wish he was one of those directors where people just knew his name and knew it was
Mm-hmm.
going to be good because he deserves it. And his movies are just great, and this movie is really great. It's so clever. I love movies about memories. I love the
Mm-hmm.
play Our Town. I think it's so good. I love Defending Your Life with
Mm-hmm.
Albert Brooks. If you've ever seen that, it's really funny. And Meryl Streep. And this is kind of that same idea of those. And this is the idea is there's this way station in between the spirit world and Earth, and what happens is you get there and you have to decide one memory that you want to take that they're going to make like a little like movie off of and then they're going to give it to you and take it on to the next step of
Mm-hmm.
journey. And so it's about all these different people that are trying to decide what memory that they're going to have. And a lot of them, it's really easy. There's Disneyland or something like that. But then others are really struggling to come up with anything. And some don't feel like worthy of picking anything. And it's so moving and lovely, and it's probably the best made movie, I think, on my list.
Mm,
Like I said, I was going for favorites versus best. I think if I were gonna, I think this is the best made movie of the list. He's just, it's beautifully realized, and it's just such an interesting idea. You leave you thinking, what would I pick? What memory
mm,
would I want to have made?
yeah, I agree. It was my number six, and I think it's a great movie. I think it's such a cool, unique vision of the afterlife that,
Yeah,
I've never seen something quite like it. I love that the memories are all in VHS and
yeah,
everything is like very, like, it's like it feels, I guess back then it was like technology of the time, but it also feels a little bit out of time in the way of
yeah,
the sort of big house where everyone is and they're all thinking about their memories. And I really particularly love the second part of the movie when they start to recreate the memories and you
yeah,
realize that it's not just some like magical thing where you like they pluck them out of your brain or something, which you could see in other sci-fi movies, but
yeah,
rather that they have to put up the memory again and like almost like making a movie, which I think is also something that he's getting into
yeah,
in this movie. And I think, yeah, it's such a, yeah, it's such a soulful, very, as is usually his style for Koreeda, just like, subtle but like very deeply felt movies.
hmm, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and it's, I'm glad you got to see it because it's tough to find. I actually have it on VHS, believe it or not. So I
Hmm.
watched it because it's out of print.
There you go.
And I just wish that Criterion would release it. It deserves to be a Criterion. Like there's,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Or yeah, at the very least, it deserves some sort of release on like digital media that,
yeah,
of some sort. If Criterion did it, it would be great because they've done great work with other
yeah,
Koreeda movies.
yeah. You have this number three.
My number three is the movie that very infamously lost the Best Picture Oscar to Shakespeare
Yeah,
in Love, and it is Saving Private Ryan, directed by Steven Spielberg.
yeah. So,
Um,
so what do you like about this?
so I think I mean, I love Spielberg, and I think this is a great movie. I think a lot of people think the opening battle sequence is, which I agree with, is like an outstanding piece of filmmaking. It's just like such a visceral, puts you there recreation of war, and it's like so intense. And when I first saw it, I got really like, oh my God, I can't even picture myself. Like I would immediately die in that situation. I wouldn't even know what to do with myself. And it's just
Yeah,
incredible that people had to go through it, and some of them survived. And then a lot of people, I think, feel like the movie kind of like loses steam after that or becomes a little more traditional, a little hokey or whatever. I
uh-huh,
disagree with those people. I think that even though I can see anyone liking the movie for being a very, emotional story about veterans and honoring the veterans, I also see it as a movie that has, while it does that, and I think it really has a lot of empathy for the people who had to go through this whole thing. I think it's also a little critical of the whole situation of war and what, um, I think the idea that this whole troop has to go and find this one person and save this one person, I think
uh-huh.
it's both very heroic and also like, I think the movie also asks many questions about what is really the point of that, right? Like what is, um, how do we quantify the lives of people, like saving this one person, but like everyone else should also is dying around them. And while you're happy that they're given the sacrifice, it also feels weirdly strange. Like I think it makes me really think of the whole sort of pointlessness of war while being a really engaging, very emotional movie.
Yeah, I can. Excuse me. I can understand that. It's a good movie. I rewatched it for this list, and I do feel like though there are other war movies that I think are like a little bit better in retrospect. Um, and you're gonna freak out about this, but I think just in structure, a movie like for me, Hacksaw Ridge because I'm very invested in like the character by the time the carnage starts. Structure of it, like I feel like you get that carnage all at the beginning as opposed to at the end. And so I'm not like really invested in those characters because I think even something like Dunkirk, it builds, it builds and builds and builds and builds, and so I'm able to be more invested in the characters than I was. I do feel like this movie is, I'm in the camp, I guess, that thinks it's a little top heavy. But I don't think that's, the other stuff is bad. It just didn't make my top 10 list.
Right. I think in that case it's just one of those things in which we just it's just a disagreement. Like it's just a personal thing, right? Because I feel that the actors are so charismatic in this movie that I really get to feel a lot for them in very little time. I think it's very effective at connecting me with them very quickly in a way that I really struggled, for example, in Dunkirk, to really know their personalities or anything. And Hacksaw Ridge is a completely different can of worms for me. I have like other sorts of issues with the movie. But yeah, no, I love this movie. I put it at number 3.
Cool, great. It's a good film. So all right. So my number 2 is an animated film because I love animation, and it's The Prince of Egypt. The Prince of Egypt is actually in my top 10 favorite animated films of all time. I love The Prince of Egypt. I think it's the best version of the Moses story, in my opinion. I love the reverence that the movie has. There's, even in scenes that are really big and bombastic, I think there's a reverence and awe that you feel, like the party in the Red Sea. I think is you feel it as a spiritual moment for me. I think the burning bush is so beautifully done. I think there's a real reverence there. I love the whole relationship between these two brothers and how it grows throughout the whole film. I love the animation is stunning, in my opinion. I think it is beautiful, and it breaks my heart that I wish that these DreamWorks films, Spirit of the Cimarron and The Prince of Egypt, I wish that they had been the big hits, not the comedies, because I wish that they had gone in this direction as a studio and not in the Shrek direction, but sadly that was not the case. I really love, I love the songs. I think Steven Schwartz, I think these are his best songs. I love the score by Hans Zimmer. I love, I just love it. I think it's, the only part that doesn't work for me is the priests, who are, that song is a groaner. I don't really like it. But what's that?
Yeah, no, I was just agreeing with you. You're talking about the Steve Martin Short characters, right?
But I think that unlike the gargoyles in Hunchback, where those characters actually dramatically affect the plot, and like make certain choices and whatever. And so I find these more forgiving. I'm able to put them aside because they don't really affect the plot that much, or the main characters. But I don't know. I love like Look at Your Life Through Heaven's Eyes. I think that's a beautiful song. I love When You Believe. I think it's a great song. I love, I think they got really good singers, really good voice talent. And I just love it. So there we go.
Yeah. I will agree with some of what you said. I will say this is definitely the best looking non-Disney animated movie of the 90s, for sure. I think it is beautifully done. The animation is stunning. And I also agree that I find it very similar to Hunchback of Notre Dame in various ways, especially because it's trying to tackle these sort of heavier, more serious topics than animation usually does. And I think it does a really good job at something that Hunchback doesn't do well, which is what you talk about, the gargoyles, which is the sort of comedic relief part of it. I think Hunchback suffers a lot from feeling like it has to cater to kids, like it has to have some lightness and some comedy, and it ends up having it in weird places. that this movie doesn't. So I
Yeah.
think that's a really good call on the directors of this movie. The part where I kind of disagree with, I think most people really like this movie from my general sense. I know my wife
Yeah.
loves the movie. We watched it together.
Woo!
And yeah, and I would say the movie is just like a little dull for me. And the thing that I disagree with most people is the music. I think people love the score for this movie and love the songs, and I just can't get into it for some reason.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but I just can't get there. But I think it's a pretty good movie overall.
Yeah.
It's not one
Yeah.
of my favorites.
Fair enough. Uh, yeah, I mean, that's just people have different tastes in music. That's fine. But yeah, I don't know. I just love it. And I think that it is my favorite version of the Moses story. It's certainly a billion times better than that Ridley Scott movie from a couple
Oh,
that was a
great.
travesty.
Number two is Out of Sight, directed by Steven Soderbergh. And it's a movie about George Clooney plays this sort of master criminal who's escaping prison to pull off a job. And Jennifer Lopez is the sort of police detective who is like sort of running after him and trying to catch him. Now,
Yeah.
the thing is, they are falling in love at the same time. So
Yeah.
they are kind of like finding each other attractive, and she's got to hunt him down, but they're kind of like feeling each other. It's a very great crime movie, and I think it's great from top to bottom. It's very cool. It's a great screenplay. The ending is, I think, fantastic. It builds up really well. The thing that I love the most about this movie is that it has I think, what is the sexiest movie scene that I have ever seen in any movie. It is just, I don't want to spoil it.
Yeah.
I don't think you've seen the movie, right?
I haven't. I haven't.
Okay, so I don't want to spoil it. It comes in the middle of the movie. It takes place at a bar between George Clooney and Jennifer Lopez, and it's the sexiest thing I have ever seen.
Yeah.
Obviously, these are two very attractive, very sexy people,
Right.
and they have great chemistry together. And when they come into the scene, it's just, oh my God. I just had to put it in number two because I have never seen something like it.
Cool. Yeah, I've heard of that, and that it's a good one. So I'll have to check it out. So all right, we are at our number ones. This is very exciting. Number one from 1998, and some people might criticize my number one. I don't care. My number one is You've Got Mail. You've Got Mail is probably the movie I quote the most in my life.
Yeah.
Whether it's like emotional moments, like when she says that people always say change is a good thing, but what they're really saying is something you didn't want to have happen has happened. And I like, that's so great. I don't know, just even like little things, like whenever I'm at a movie theater, I always think of I think of this is a hot dog singing. You did quiet while the hot dog is singing. And I love like I love the supporting cast is so great with Greg Kinnear, and like the thank you that whole scene is hilarious. I love Gene Stapleton as the she fell in love with Generosimo Franco. Like, that's hilarious to me. Like, sure, you spend in Italy, you spend way too much on, you buy leather jackets for way more than they're worth. But you don't fall in love with fascist dictators. Like, hilarious. I mean, the real star for me in this movie is Nora Ephron's brilliant writing. I just think she is the best. I love her books. I love even her bad movies. They're still like, I think there's little nuggets of Nora Ephron in there that I can kind of take away from them, even though I acknowledge they're bad. But this one, I just love everything about it. I love the heart to it. I love the focus on reading and books. I love the sort of correspondence between the two of them. I actually think it's a really like interesting movie about work and how we so identify, like, people say, what do you do? And they're asking about your job, and how it's only until Kathleen Kelly, it's only when she is outside of that identification that she is able to kind of be herself and actually fall in love. And with Joe, and same thing with Joe. Like, he's so tied to his identity with this job, but that's not really who he is. And I love Parker Posey as Patricia. Patricia makes coffee nervous. Hilarious. But then there's like scenes with such heart, like when she overhears the guy in the big store reading she's like skating shoes, and skating shoes is my favorite, but ballet shoes is completely wonderful, but it's out of print. Like, this is a movie that I have seen, as you can probably tell, since I quote it a million times. This is a movie that I've seen probably more than almost any other movie. It's a movie that I love. I think it's super romantic. I love that it uses the West Side, New York City. I one of my trips to New York, I like went and visited all the, like, went to the cheap shop that is and went around to Riverside Park and Grace Papaya, and really fun. And I don't know, there's also really lovely moments. Like, I love when she says sometimes I wonder about my life. I lead a small life, valuable but small. And sometimes I wonder, do I do it because I like it or because I haven't been brave? And that's something I think about all the time, because my life is small, but I haven't like conquered the world or done some great thing. So that's one that I love. I love when she's just, I love when he's talking about you zing them. And if only I could pass my zingers on to you. And he's like, I promise you that when you have the pleasure of saying the thing you did at the moment you want to say it, remorse inevitably occurs. Like, that whole scene is great. Because I think of so many times when, like, 20 minutes after a conversation, I'm like, oh, I should have said that. That was darn it, I should have said the right thing. I wish I had said it that way. And I don't know. I could go on for an hour of, like, I love when she thinks that he's the rooftop killer.
Right.
Anyway, I could go on for forever. I love it. I just think it's so well written and funny. And I love Meg Ryan, Tom Hanks. I love the scene when he brings her flowers. The whole scene is great. Which is sick. Anyway, so I love it. That's my number one.
Okay. I guess you'll be happy to hear this came very close to making my list.
Woohoo!
One of the reasons I didn't put on the list was because I knew it was going to be your number one, and I didn't want to steal your momentum by, like, mentioning it early in the episode.
Yeah.
And the other reasons, I think I love a lot of things about it. I used to live in the Upper West Side for a while, so I recognize a lot of the places. I think, it feels very funny. Like, her version of it is very accurate in many ways.
Yeah.
Especially of the kinds of people who live there. Also, I think that Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan are great together. I think, like you, that it has a lot of things to say about tradition and nostalgia and technology and also work. I do think that I feel like the movie sort of drops the whole business part of it. I guess it's because of what you say, that she has to sort of, like, move on to her own to, like, be able to fall in love. But I do wish there was a little bit more of a button on the business side of it. And because she loses the bookstore, and what happens there, what does she do with her life after that, except of being with him?
Yeah.
But I think it feels to me like almost like the apex of romantic comedies in the 90s. And I think it really feels like if you wanted to show a person what those movies were like, you have to show them You've Got Mail. It's like the perfect,
Yeah,
it feels like it all builds up to that. And I think it's not a coincidence. And after You've Got Mail, the romantic comedy sort of, like, started to decline and eventually, disappeared.
And I do think it is one of the most successful remakes ever made. Like, Shop Around the Corner is a really fun little movie, but I just don't think the writing in that movie is as good as the writing that Nora Ephron has. So, when people poo-poo remakes, like, here we've had two on our list that our closer list that we've talked about that are really solid. I had 3 actually on mine, because of Mighty Joe
Right.
Young. Yeah, and also I just have to say I love Dave Chappelle too. They really nailed the friends and the side characters, I think, in this, which is such a key to romantic comedy. Like, he's so funny. To hear more of me oohing and gushing about You've Got Mail, you can listen to me and Christine talk to the whole podcast about it. If you want to, what do you have at number one?
Number one is a movie that I saw for the first time preparing for this list, and I did not expect it to like it as much as I did, and I just kept thinking about it, and it just becomes more and more beloved in my mind as I think of it, and that's The Last Days of Disco, written and directed by Whit Stillman. And so, kind of related to what I said about Rushmore, I have been, especially when I was younger in my teenage years, a very pretentious person in many ways. And I think this is a movie about sort of like pretentious young graduates who get out of college and they think they know everything about life, and they have all these weird opinions and all these affectations. And it really feels very honest and accurate and precise about the kind of person that behaves that way to me, while also being very hilarious and being a very objective view of the, sort of the faults with those people. I think it's basically, it takes place in the early 80s when disco was kind of like going away, and this group of people who are kind of like stuck in the end of an era, sort of, right?
Yeah.
And I think I'm also attracted a lot to those sort of movies. This movie just like hit me in so many things that I like, especially there's the sort of characters that I relate to a lot, which are this like, know-it-alls that are also actually saying very dumb things. There's the sort of very witty and very sort of specific type of comedy. And then there's this whole thing about the end of an era, which is something that I always gravitate towards, the sort of like nostalgia that something is like ending around you and you are in the middle of it. I don't know, this movie just spoke to me in very, very personal ways, and I'm not sure that I know why I love it so much. I think I'll have to watch it a million times until I figure it out, but I will do so very gladly because I really like it. Chloe Sevigny and Kate Beckinsale are the leads in the movie, and they do a great job. I think they're excellent.
I should have watched this for the podcast. That was dumb, but I need to see it because I really love Love and Friendship, and I really enjoyed the Metropolitan.
Yeah, that's his first movie.
Yeah, which sounds very similar to this one because
it
also,
probably is. I think, yeah, definitely. And Kate Beckinsale, who was the lead in Love and Friendship, and she gives a similar performance here. She is playing this very like sort of witty character who says a lot of things, but unlike Lady Susan, I guess Lady Susan is also a little superficial and in the things that she says a lot of the times, and her character here is definitely very self-centered and superficial.
Yeah, that's kind of in Metropolitan. They're these pedantic post-college group or some Marine college that are home for a holiday for Christmas, and it's a very talky movie, and the characters aren't very likable, so it's definitely not going to be for everybody. But I enjoyed it. I thought it was good.
Yeah.
So I'll have to see that. That's cool. Great. Well, we did it. We made our list.
Yay. We did it.
So I'll just go over my list. So number 10, I have A Bug's Life. Number 9, Mighty Joe Young. Number 8, The Parent Trap. Number 7, The Mask of Zorro. Number 6, Ever After. Number 5, Mulan. Number 4, The Truman Show. Number 3, Afterlife. Number 2, The Prince of Egypt. And number 1, You've Got Mail.
Great. And my list is at number 10, Run, Lola, Run. Number 9, The Celebration. Number 8, The Parent Trap. Number 7, Shakespeare in Love. Number 6, Afterlife. Number 5, The Big Lebowski. Number 4, Rushmore. Number 3, Saving Private Ryan. Number 2, the sexiest movie of all time, Out of Sight. And number 1, The Last Days of Disco.
Awesome. Great. Oh, well, this was so fun. I really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed looking back at these, and it was fun to prepare and watch all these movies again. I probably watched about 20 movies,
Definitely.
25 maybe even to get ready, because there's I don't know it was so that was part of the fun of it as well for me.
Mm-hmm.
So, where can people find you if they want to follow you online?
Um, they can find me on Twitter, and that would be at Coco Hits New York. And you can also follow my blog, which is cocohitsny.wordpress.com. Um, I haven't written a lot in a while, but the New York Film Festival just started, so I'm gonna go be watching some movies there and hope to write some reviews. So I'll be posting that soon.
Oh, jealous. Okay, cool. Great. I will have that in the description section if people want to check it out. And yeah, you can follow me at Rachel's Reviews here on iTunes or on YouTube. So make sure to put in your reviews on iTunes if you can. That really helps us out. And give us a thumbs up, subscribe on YouTube. And thanks again. I really enjoyed it. It's always fun when we can get together.
It definitely is. Thank you for having me.
Okay. All right. We'll talk to you all. Let us know in the comment section or on Twitter what your favorites are. If you've seen any of these that we mentioned, of course, some of them you probably will have seen. What you like from this year of 1998. Let us know, and it'll be fun. So, okay, great. Well, thanks again, and we will talk again soon.
Okay, thank
Bye.
you.